In this video, I am going to look at a game I played last Tuesday in the 5th round of this year's Horsham Club Championship. I had the white pieces and was up against Anthony Higgs. We were both on 3.5 points out of 4, so this was an important top-of-the-table clash. I started with d4. I intended to play e4, but picked up the wrong pawn. Fortunately, I have plenty of experience playing d4, not least against my current opponent, so this wasn't a disaster. My opponent responded with d5. This was a small surprise, as he usually plays knight f6, and after c4, either c5, d5, e5, the Czech Benoni, or d6, the Old Indian. After d5, I played c4, the Queen's Gambit, which is what I usually play here, and while waiting for my opponent to respond, I wondered whether he was going to play e5, the Alban counter gambit, which he has been known to play on occasion in the past. Play there goes d takes e5, d4, knight f3, knight c6, and the old main line was g3, but nowadays a3 is the move that is usually recommended, and knight on b to d2 is an interesting alternative. However, my opponent chose e6, and now I have a choice of knight moves, knight c3 or knight f3. Both allow certain possibilities for both white and black, and disallow certain possibilities for both white and black. After knight f3, which was my choice, my opponent chose c6, the triangle system. Now, knight c3 is usually met with d takes c4, the Noteboom variation, which is incredibly complicated and not necessarily good for white. I chose bishop g5 instead, which is a tricky move order against which black has no obviously good response. Black chose knight f6, which is the soundest move in general terms, but this allows a transposition to the main line of the semi-Slav, something that black is often trying to avoid when choosing the triangle system. After knight c3, black has a number of options. The traditional main line is d takes c4, the Botvinnik system, where play would go e4, b5, e5, h6, bishop h4, g5, and now white plays the temporary sacrifice, knight takes g5. Knight d5 is an interesting but theoretically dubious response. Black more often plays h takes g5, bishop takes g5, when white regains the piece. Black now most often plays knight on b to d7, but bishop e7 is an interesting alternative. Now, this whole line is incredibly complicated, and although my knowledge of it is not as up to date as it might be, I certainly know more about it than my opponent does, and it was not likely that he was going to choose this. Another move, instead of d takes c4, is h6, the Moscow variation. Now, white has two approaches here. One is the solid bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, where white gives up the bishop pair in return for a space advantage, and the gambit line, bishop h4, d takes c4, e4, g5, bishop g3, b5, which is incredibly murky. As with the Botvinnik system, this is a line that I know better than my opponent, and he was therefore unlikely to choose it. A third alternative is knight on b to d7, e3, queen a5, which is the Cambridge Springs variation, a very solid alternative, and something that I thought he might try. However, instead of these three respectable moves, he chose to play bishop e7. This leads to an inferior version of the Queen's Gambit declined, as black is prematurely committed to c6. Play went e3, knight on b to d7, and now bishop d3 is most straightforward. Compared to the standard version of this line, black has played c6 without white having played rook c1 to provoke it. White is therefore a tempo up, as he does not really want to play rook c1. However, the move played in the game, queen c2, is also fine, as it is a useful move for white. Play then went castles, bishop d3, rook e8, c takes d5. White decided to go into the exchange variation. Now black was not in a position to develop his bishop on c8 quickly. E takes d5. h3. White prepares bishop f4 in response to knight e4, avoiding exchanges. Now black wanted to aim for exchanges, but knight h5 is not possible due to bishop takes h7 check. He therefore had to try knight e4. White responded with the planned bishop f4, avoiding the swap of bishops. Play went knight on d to f6, castles. And now bishop f5 leaves black's pieces awkwardly placed after knight e5. So he played knight takes c3 instead, and white responded b takes c3. Play went h6. Black wants to eliminate the pressure on h7, but this weakens his king side. Knight e5. The knight is strongly placed here, as with the black pawn on h6, the move f6 is less attractive, as it would create a hole on g6. Now, bishop e6 was most sensible, developing, but black was tempted by the idea of expelling the knight on e5. Knight d7. When black played this, I immediately noticed the possibility of a sacrifice on f7. After over 40 minutes thought over the next couple of moves, I concluded it was not sound, so I decided on a quieter continuation. Unfortunately, this left me rather short of time for the rest of the game, which led to me missing a later opportunity. Now, knight takes f7 at once does not work, as after king takes f7, white has no follow-up. Instead, I chose the correct bishop h7 check. This is a good move, driving the black king to an inferior square, but I spent 21 minutes on it, as I was considering whether to sacrifice on f7 on the next move. I should have quickly concluded that it was still good if I followed it up quietly, then played it quickly, intending to have a longer think on the next move. King f8. Note that king h8 loses to knight takes f7 mate, so black has to play king f8. Now I spent 20 minutes trying to decide whether to sacrifice on f7. I correctly concluded that it did not give an advantage, and so went for a quieter approach. Let's have a look at the consequences of taking on f7. knight takes f7, king takes f7, queen g6 check, king f8. Now, I considered three possibilities for white here. Queen e6 looks tempting, but after knight f6, not only does black stop the mate, but white's queen on e6 is in trouble. Another rather fanciful possibility that I considered was bishop c7. But after queen takes c7, bishop g8, threatening mate on f7, king takes g8, queen takes e8 check, knight f8, black has a winning material advantage. So I concluded that white's only sensible continuation was to sacrifice on h6 with bishop takes h6. Now, black cannot take the bishop g takes h6 because of queen g8 mate. Instead, he has to play bishop f6 when I couldn't see a way for white to continue the attack. Play could continue something like bishop f4, king e7, queen g3, knight f8, bishop c7, queen d7, bishop c2, when white probably has enough compensation for the sacrifice piece, but certainly no way to cause black particular difficulties. So this line doesn't seem to have any particular practical value. Now, instead of this sacrifice, my opponent suggested, after the game, the move knight g4. But although white seems to be better after this move, it doesn't seem to be any improvement on the game continuation. Play could go knight f6, and knight takes h6 could be met with bishop d6, which looks fine for black. So white should play knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, bishop d3, when he is slightly better, as in the game. Now, in the game, I played knight f3, but there was a possibility that I didn't consider, which was to play rook on a to b1. The idea is that black can take on e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, but this doesn't really free his position because white's remaining minor pieces are more active. And black's knight was a useful defensive piece. After bishop d6, f4, black cannot take on e5, bishop takes e5, because f takes e5 just opens the f file for the attack. However, after f6, white can just ignore the attack on the bishop and play rook f3. Black cannot afford to open up the f file, whereas white has the simple attacking plan of queen g6, rook g3, followed by queen takes g7 mate. Black doesn't really seem to have a satisfactory defence to this. However, I was fixated on the idea of avoiding the exchange of knights, and so I played the simple knight f3. Play went knight f6, bishop d3, bishop d6, bishop takes d6 check, queen takes d6, knight e5. Now, king g8 was the most solid move, although white is still better after f4. However, black chose the weaker knight g8. He aims to play knight e7 and f6, but this weakens his position. Play continued. f4, knight e7, rook on a to e1. White now had plenty of pressure on the black position. Black now cracked, playing the weakening f6. White now had a strong tactic, but missed it as he was running short of time and playing automatic moves, rather than looking for more. Now, bishop g6 would have left black in big trouble. F takes e5, f takes e5 check, wins the queen here and on subsequent moves, while rook d8, knight f7 wins the exchange. So black would have had to have tried knight takes g6. After, queen takes g6, threatening queen f7 mate, bishop e6, covering f7, queen h7, bishop g8, queen h8. White intends to continue with rook f3 to g3, hitting g7, against which black has no defence. Instead, white went for knight g6 check, which allowed black to limit the damage. Play went king g8, knight takes e7 check, rook takes e7, queen f2. White now started to build up on the king side, while black adopted a solid defence. White pressed for a while, but black was able to hold. Both players were short of time at this point, but managed to avoid any blunders. Play went f5, queen h4, bishop e6, g4, rook f8, king h1, bishop c8, rook g1. White is building up on the g file, but black holds firm. King h7, queen g3, king h8, rook e2, queen a3. Black offered a draw, which white declined, as he still wanted to press further. Queen h4. Now, queen takes c3 loses to queen takes e7, so black instead played queen d6, and play went g5, rook e8, queen g3, queen e7, h4, rook g6, queen h3, b5, rook on g to e1, king g8, king h2, rook d6, king h1, and white finally offered a draw, which black accepted. Both players were incredibly short of time, and really there wasn't any way for either to make progress.